Hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the second module of the course Exporting Creativity that we have organized at IDB INTAL. Before we start, I wanted to greet you all and to remind you that this course is done in the context of the Integrados Network. As we said, this network has more than 1,900 young people from Latin America and the Caribbean interested in regional trade. Some announcements before we start. You have asked us about the credential. We have an official IDB credential for everyone who attends at least 75% of the modules. So this will be 3 out of the 4 modules. Also to remind you that you have chat open in case you have any questions for the speakers today. And this is also a question that we had, material. Well, we will share the material once we finish the course. Last but not least, remember that we have interpretation, so you can choose interpretation at the bottom of your screen, and you have the options of English and Spanish. Having said that, I will let you know what the dynamics will be today. Today, we have the honor of having 2 speakers, very important speakers. First of all, we will have a block during which we will be speaking to Claudia, Triana de Vargas, General Director of Proimágenes Colombia, and Diego Bustos, Subdirector of Planning. They will share what Colombia is doing. Colombia is a success story when it comes to public policy and the articulation of the filmmaking industry. After this first half an hour, we will have a section for questions. You can write down your questions in the chat. And then we will move on to a second section during which Pablo Culell will be speaking. He is VP of Development and Production for Underground, Telemundo Studios, and NBC Universal. We will be talking with him, and then we will also have another section for Q&A. Having said that, I would like to introduce Claudia Triana. She is General Director of Proimágenes Colombia. She has a bachelor's degree from the University of Navarra. She has participated in culture management since the 70s, and from 1998 up to today, she has been the director of Proimágenes Colombia. This is a non-for-profit organization made by public and private organizations with the aim of promoting the filmmaking industry in Colombia. Claudia has participated in the design of the Colombian system for incentives in the filmmaking industry, and she has also managed the Colombian Film Fund, Film Development Fund, and many other funds in Colombia. Both of them, Claudia and Diego, will be talking about Colombia and everything they have learned throughout their experience, and everything that we can learn regarding exporting audiovisual services in this region. Having said this, thank you very much, and I will give them the floor.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Lo primero que tengo que hacer
The first
es
thing I have
excusarme
to
por
do is to
haberme
say sorry
contaminado este virus que hay en
because
Colombia en
I
este momento
am a bit,
y estoy prácticamente
I have a
sin
bit of a
voz.
cold, so I
Voy a
can
hacer todo mi
barely
esfuerzo
speak.
para estar
I
a la
will try
altura
to
de
do my
Pablo
best
y poder compartir con ustedes algunas ideas
to share with
a
you some
pesar
ideas,
de este tono de voz
even though
bastante
my voice is
estridente.
not really helping
Muchas
me
gracias
today.
realmente al
Thank
BID,
you
a todos
very
los que están
much to
conectados en
IDB and
esta
everyone
sesión
who is
por habernos
participating
dado
in
la
this session,
oportunidad de
for giving
compartir con
us
ustedes este
the
caso
possibility
que
of
para
sharing
nosotros ha sido
our
de
story.
enorme esfuerzo, pero
It has
también
meant
de muchas
a lot of
satisfacciones en
effort,
los
but of course,
últimos
a lot of
25 años.
satisfaction in the last 25
Para que
years.
ustedes se hagan una idea,
For you to
eh,
have an idea,
nosotros no teníamos
we
sino una película en las salas de cine en el año
didn't have
1997,
in
la película
1997
de largometraje,
we only have
y teníamos la
one feature
posibilidad
film in our movie
de que se
theaters,
creara
and we
varios de
had
los
the
factores
chance
que han sido
of
fundamentales
giving
para
way of many of the factors that have
construir
been
este
fundamental
sistema
to
de estímulos,
building
para
this
construir esta
incentive
nueva
system,
atmósfera de
to
negocios
build this new
en la
business
industria
environment in the
cinematográfica y
filmmaking
audiovisual en el país.
industry.
En primer lugar,
First of
en
all,
el año 97
in 97,
se crea la Ley de Cultura, y al
the
crearse la Ley de Cultura, que después vamos a ver
Culture Act was passed,
en mayor detalle,
and now we
pues se
will go
crea
deeper
un
into this.
elemento fundamental
With
para
that law,
apoyar a la creación, a los creadores, a las
there were
narrativas
different
nacionales,
systems created
y es
to support the
la
national audiovisual
institucionalidad.
system,
Se
and this
crea
would be
el Ministerio de
the
Cultura, que a
Ministry of
pesar de que
Culture.
García Márquez estaba muy en contra
Even though
de
Garcia
que se
Marquez
creara
was
en el
very much
gobierno del
against
presidente
of
Samper,
during the government of President Samper,
se crea el Ministerio de Cultura,
the
y en
Ministry
esa
of
misma
Culture
ley
was
se
created, and in
crea
the
otra
same act,
institución, que es la que
another
acabas de
institution was
mencionar,
created,
Eliel,
which is the one that
que es
Eliel just mentioned, which
Proimágenes
would be
Colombia. Se
Proimágenes
crea como una
Colombia.
entidad sin ánimo de lucro,
It is a
de
non-for-profit
participación
organization
mixta, pero
with
realmente como
mixed
una mesa de
participation, private
concertación,
and public.
para que no
But
solamente
the
los
idea is that
exhibidores, distribuidores, productores,
distributors,
realizadores se sienten en la misma,
producers, and
en el
filmmakers,
mismo
that they
recinto y
could
en la
gather
misma
and,
institución
and
con el
discuss
Ministerio de Cultura, el Ministerio de
with the
Educación, el
Ministry of
Ministerio de las
Culture, Ministry of
Comunicaciones,
Education,
inclusive
Ministry of
la
Communication,
autoridad de
and other
impuestos y aduanas
authorities, even
nacionales,
the tax,
eh,
the
porque
national tax
recordemos que en
direction.
ese momento, en el
Because
año
at that
97,
point, in
98, pues se hacía
97,
todavía
98,
cine en, en
films were
35
made
milímetros, en
with
película virgen,
35
que
millimeter
teníamos que
with
importar
film,
al
right?
país, y
We had
no
to
teníamos
import the
laboratorios
actual film,
cinematográficos, y por lo
and we
tanto
didn't
teníamos
have the
que
labs
exportar ese material
to
rodado
develop
para que fuese
the films, and we had to
revelado
export
en
the
otros
films
países del
to
mundo y
develop it
volverlo
in
a
other
traer al
countries
país.
in the world, and then
Entonces,
bring it back
eh,
to our country.
teníamos también en esa mesa, o tenemos también en
So
esa
in
mesa,
this round
la primera
table,
escuela de cine y
we had
televisión
our
que se
first
estaba creando también
film
por esa
and
época
TV
en la
school that
Universidad
was
Nacional.
created back then
De
in
manera
the
que, y
National University.
Conciencias, que es el Instituto de la Ciencia y
We
Tecnología,
also had
porque
the
esta entidad se
Science and
rige no
Technology
solamente por
Institute
la Ley de Cultura, sino
that
por
worked in the
la Ley de
framework
Ciencia y Tecnología.
um,
Eso nos
of the
permitió tener
culture law, but
un
also the
ámbito
science and technology law.
de conversación, de
This
diálogo, de
created an
concertación,
environment
para
of
revisar
debate
cómo podíamos todos
to
trabajar
see how we could
juntos
all work
para
together
promocionar,
to
fomentar
promote
y, y hacer visible en el
and
mundo
make visible all
nuestros
over the
contenidos
world
y nuestra
our content
cinematografía en
and
ese momento.
our films.
Otro punto fundamental,
Another fundamental
que todos los órganos
point
de todos
is
esos
that
fondos que tú
all
mencionaste,
the all
con los
the
cuales estamos,
all these
eh,
organizations and institutions
estamos
that we have mentioned
alineados, y los cuales manejamos,
and the ones that we manage,
todos esos
all of these
fondos tienen una
funds
representación
are represented.
de todos los sectores. Son órganos
I mean, they represent
representativos
different
del
sectors,
sector que, que son los que toman las decisiones
and they
sobre
make
los
the
recursos de cada
decisions
uno de esos fondos y de
on
cada uno de
the
esos
resources of
instrumentos.
each of these funds
Entonces
and these
hablamos
incentives.
en
So,
ese poco de historia
well,
de la ley
I
397 del
mentioned
97,
in this background, I
donde se
mentioned
crea
the
el
law from
Ministerio de Cultura y donde se
1997
crea
that
también
created the Ministry of Culture
Proimágenes Colombia.
and that
Pero
created
claro,
Proimágenes too.
como nos pasa muchas veces con estos
But
instrumentos
something that
normativos,
happened
pues se había
sometimes
creado,
with these laws,
le faltaba a esa ley
it
que
was
sí
created
estaba basada en las
and it was
imágenes del
based
movimiento como parte del
on,
patrimonio cultural de la
I mean, it
nación, que
considered
el gobierno
filmmaking
nacional
and
tenía que
audiovisual content
apoyarlo,
as part
que
of
se
the
debían estimular a los
heritage of the
creadores, a la
country, and we
preservación del
had to
patrimonio,
give
dar
importance to
créditos,
creators,
etcétera, a las
to
películas
feature them in the
y
credits
demás,
and so on,
pero no tenía las herramientas
but
financieras
we didn't have
diferentes
the financial
a
tools
el presupuesto general de la nación.
separate
Y
from the
ustedes saben,
national
por lo
budget
menos en
for the
nuestra
country.
región,
And you know,
que
in our
el
region,
presupuesto general de la nación tiene
the
enormes
national
dificultades.
budget
Ahora ya nos han
tends to be
anunciado
tight.
una nueva reforma tributaria
Now
para el final de este
a
año
tax
para poder
reform has been
financiar
announced in our
12
country
billones
in order
de
to
pesos
finance
que requieren
um,
nuevamente el
12
presupuesto para el
trillion
2025.
Colombian
Y por
pesos
lo
that are
tanto,
required for
pues
the budget of
cuando
next year.
estábamos en
So
esta mesa de concertación,
when
encontramos
we
que
were
nos
at this
faltaban
round table,
mecanismos
we
de
saw that
financiación,
we
que es el
didn't have the
tercer
necessary
factor
fund mechanisms,
importantísimo
which tends to be
que nos
an
permitió
essential factor,
crecer rápidamente
which then allowed us to
en este
grow very
proceso que
quickly
les
in this
queremos
process
compartir. Es
that we want to
cuando
share with you.
decidimos entre todos
When we
que
all
había que hacer una
together
nueva ley
decided
que
that we needed a
complementara
new
esa
law
ley de
that
cultura,
that would
que
complement this first
pudiera
culture law,
ofrecer unos
that would
mecanismos
also offer the
que ya
mechanisms
habíamos identificado como
that we
buenas
had
prácticas en
already
otros países,
defined
como
as
referencia
very
obviamente
useful in other
Francia,
countries. For
pero también
example, we had the
teníamos al
reference of
Brasil,
France,
que en el
but
año
we also
93 había
analyzed
hecho una ley
Brazil.
muy
Brazil in
exitosa,
93
y
passed a
queríamos
law that was
ver
very
cómo
successful in
nosotros
that
también
sense.
lográbamos apropiarnos
And
de
then we
algunos
also
mecanismos. Y así
realized
fue
that we were
como,
able
a
to
partir
um,
de la
get
ley
more comfortable with
814 de
certain mechanisms.
2003,
So then in
que fuimos
2003, we passed
todos
Law
en bloque
814,
a defender
and
desde
all of
Proimágenes
us
Colombia, desde
together,
todos los
we
jugadores
uh,
públicos y privados
defended
en el
Proimágenes
gobierno
Colombia
nacional,
before the
logramos
national
sacar
government,
la
and
ley
we
en el
managed
2003 y
to pass
empezarla a
this law
implementar en
this
el
year.
2004.
And in
Eh,
2004, we
Se
started
crearon realmente
implementing
dos
the law.
mecanismos muy
We
importantes:
created very
el
important
Fondo para el
mechanisms,
Desarrollo
the
Cinematográfico,
Film
que
Development
es
Fund,
básicamente cómo funciona
FTC, which is
una de las
basically
fuentes de
how
ingresos del CNC en
um,
Francia, que
this is
tienen un
how they do it in
porcentaje
France. Actually,
de
there is a
los ingresos
percentage
de
of
la
the
taquilla del
income
cine, de los
from
ingresos de los
the box
exhibidores,
office,
distribuidores y
and this
productores en
um,
su desempeño en salas de cine.
so the
Eso
results
en
from
Colombia,
the box office
desde la
is
Constitución
then
del 91, que
it is then
cambiamos la
distributed.
Constitución,
In
no se permiten
91,
las
we
rentas de
changed the
destinación
constitution,
específica. Es decir, que
and
no se
that
permite
wouldn't
que
allow
haya un impuesto, por ejemplo, a los
we wouldn't
cigarrillos
allow, for
para
example, a
financiar la
tax
cultura.
for
Y
cigarettes, for instance, that would
se
then be used to
encontró
finance
este
culture.
camino de
So we
las
found this
contribuciones
way,
parafiscales, es decir, que
this
la industria misma aporta
parallel
a un
tax
fondo que
incentive. So
se
the industry
redistribuye de
itself
nuevo en
funds
las necesidades del sector. En Colombia
the
lo teníamos muy
redistribution
famoso, el fondo de
according
los
to the needs in the
cafeteros,
sector. We
y
had something
no
similar
había
in the
todavía
coffee sector,
ningún fondo
but there
para el tema
wasn't a
cultural
fund
o de las
for
industrias
culture
creativas.
or
Y es así
creative
como
industries.
se
So
crea
that's
entonces el
how
Fondo para el
we
Desarrollo
created the
Cinematográfico
Film Development
como un
Fund.
fondo cuenta, es
It
decir,
is
que no tiene
a fund
personería
account. I
jurídica,
mean, it's
cuya
not a
administración
legal
está en
person,
Proimágenes Colombia,
and
que
Proimágenes
ejerce la
Colombia actually
personería
manages it,
jurídica, y,
and that would be the legal person.
y tiene un órgano de
And there is
decisión
an
representativo del
an
sector que tiene
entity
11
that
miembros,
debates, and it's made up of
donde
11
están los
members.
directores, los productores, los
We have
exhibidores,
directors,
los distribuidores,
producers,
los
distributors,
consejos departamentales de cine que
department,
hay,
councils for
30 y
filmmaking. I think there
32
are
en toda
32 in
Colombia, en cada
total
uno de
in
los
Colombia.
departamentos y en algunas ciudades hay más
In
de
some,
32.
well, maybe there
Y
are more than 32.
también tiene una representación
And
muy
we also
importante el
have
Ministerio de
the
Cultura.
representation of the Ministry of
Entonces,
Culture.
eso no nos pareció suficiente
So
y en esa ley también hay
we,
un mecanismo
in this law, we
para
also
atraer
create another
recursos,
mechanism to
ya no
bring
solamente
resources,
del gobierno nacional,
not only from
sino
the
la
national government,
participación
but also
privada,
the
la
private
participación
participation,
de,
the participation
de los privados a través de
of
unos
private
incentivos
entities
tributarios,
through
una deducción de
different
renta del
tax incentives.
165%. Con estos dos mecanismos
With
logramos
these two
conseguir
mechanisms, we
una
managed
parte
to
importante de la financiación que ha
get quite a
transformado
bit of financing that has
este periodo
allowed
donde
this
una generación
period
de
where a
cineastas ha podido
generation
hacer
of
más de
filmmakers
5
has been
películas
able to do
en
over
sus
5
carreras,
films
donde hemos
during
logrado
their careers, where we
ponernos en
have
el mapa de los festivales
managed
nacionales e
to
internacionales
reach
y donde
international
además hemos
film
logrado
festivals,
entender que
and where
teníamos que
we
hacer
also have managed to understand
otra
that
modificación a nuestras
there
leyes
had to be
para dar
another
otros frentes de
amendment to our
trabajo a
laws in
esas
order to provide
productoras que ya se estaban
other
construyendo desde
work
hacer cine
sources,
local.
job
Y es
sources to
cuando
do
aparece la
film at a
ley
local level.
1556 de
That's where
2012, donde se crea el Fondo Fílmico
15556
Colombia, que
law
es
appears
básicamente
in
también tomando
2012,
como
in which the
referencia toda la
Colombian Film
experiencia
Fund is created,
de Canadá,
also based
del
on
mundo entero,
Canada's
que tiene
experience
92 por lo menos
in the world.
lugares donde
At
tienen
least
estímulos tributarios
there
para
are
los proyectos
tax
internacionales que vienen a filmar al país.
boosts in
Y
92 places in the
luego
world,
lo
and
complementamos en
then we
el
complemented
2020,
this in
justo en el momento de
2020,
la pandemia,
right at the onset
con
of the
otro
pandemic, with
estímulo vía impuestos
another
que nos
boost
ha dejado
through
un impacto
taxes
muy
that
importante
has
en el país,
been
un
quite
gasto de por
forceful
lo menos 2.2
expenditure of at
billones de
least
pesos, y ahora se los
2.2
traduce
billion
en dólares
pesos.
Diego con mejor voz que yo,
Well, it's hard
pero
to
quería
translate into
darles
dollars. Diego will do
este
that.
primer panorama de
So I
cómo
wanted
fuimos
to give
construyendo
you this
y de
first
nuevo
overview
entre
as to
todos
how we were able to
esta ley,
build this,
este
and we
grupo de
all
leyes
chipped
que
in
se fueron
one way or
complementando,
another, and all
obviamente con
complemented
el
one
riesgo y el
another.
talento
And of course,
nacional
there's
que
risk
le apostó
involved,
a
there's
trabajar de la
national
mano con el
talent,
gobierno nacional,
and there
con una
was
voluntad
willingness,
política que
of course,
traspasó
from the
pues
state to
4
provide support
presidentes,
to the film
2 de ellos
and
que se reeligieron
industry, and
en su mandato,
continuity to
13 ministros de
presidents
cultura,
that
9
ran one after the other,
directores de
13
cinematografía,
culture
pero siempre
ministers, 4
Proimágenes
presidents in
estuvo
total, but
en
always
en el centro,
Proimágenes was at the
garantizando
core,
que todos estos estímulos y
providing
estas
a guarantee
conquistas
that all these
continuaran en el tiempo.
conquests would
Eso es
continue
fundamental.
over time,
La
which is
permanencia en el
essential,
tiempo de una
continuity
apuesta por tener
of
unas
such a
narrativas
bit in
propias
order to have
en
your
Colombia.
own narrative.
Yo quiero que tal
I
vez den el video que les
perhaps
da una
would
idea de
like
por
to
qué
show you
este
this
estudio
video
del BID y
that
Netflix que
will
hicieron en el año 2022
show why this
ya
study
decía
done in
que
conjunction with
Colombia
BID
se
already
pintaba como
foresaw
uno
that
de los
Colombia was
lugares
going to
que
be
iba a tener
one
una
of
potencia
the places that
audiovisual.
could have audiovisual power.
Muchas gracias, Claudia.
Thank
Escuchábamos
you,
recién atentamente.
Claudia. We were listening
Vemos ahí dio el
to
video en pantalla.
you with a lot of attention. We'll see the film now.
We wanted to make it in a place as magical as Colombia, and it's delivering.
Obviously the locations are amazing. I mean, we shot in the Congress. That was amazing. It was beautiful, and they bent over backwards to help us out.
Geográficamente es tan grande y es tan rico que sí pueden encontrar todo lo que están buscando en sus historias.
This unique opportunity to double for many South American countries. Like I'm driving through this and it's like French countryside in Colombia, but in the paintings of a long time ago.
Have more projects around here, you know, it's like a dream.
We wanted to get the most for our dollar to get onto screen. And so the incentive was just an additional way of actually solidifying us bringing it down here.
The money goes far here, for sure.
Haber construido un incentivo de destinas del 35% no lo tienen muchos países en el mundo.
Han sido fundamentales en el desarrollo reciente de nuestra industria audiovisual.
Rodar en condiciones muy atractivas económicamente y a nivel de producción.
También beneficia a proyectos de series, realities, videos musicales, videojuegos. Todos los formatos están ya cobijados por el SINA y por un beneficio tan importante que es pues la evolución finalmente del 35%.
Cruz cada vez más capacitados, cada vez más eficientes.
Lo más interesante realmente es la creatividad y lo que nuestras miradas pueden aportar a narrativas diferentes alrededor del mundo.
Well, we were actually pleasantly surprised with the resources here. As far as equipment, all of the grip and electric and camera equipment, that's all here, and the experienced technicians are here.
There was a rental house that had the equipment that I needed.
Very enthusiastic, very talented, very skilled crew.
Lo vemos en el número de proveedores que hay en el mercado, lo vemos en la cantidad de rodajes que se pueden dar de manera paralela en Colombia.
The Colombian Film Commission and the support and the feeling of foundation of the Film Commission is incredibly important for all filmmakers, and of course all over the world this is true, but it feels very successful here.
Nuestro trabajo en la Comisión Fílmica Nacional es atender las producciones internacionales que llegan al país.
Para que encuentren los talentos nacionales, los servicios de producción necesarios.
El trabajo constante de un mismo equipo con una estrategia y un foco durante muchos años ha fortalecido muchísimo la industria.
It's like clockwork, it's like a well-oiled machine.
And it's huge. And it's been just so beautiful. I mean, look where we are right now.
Yeah. This has been just an amazing place for the story, but also just an amazing, beautiful place to shoot as well.
A perk. The idea of being able to come here, I think it's beautiful.
Perfecto. Gracias nuevamente retomando las ideas de Claudia. Mi nombre
Thank you so much. And going back to Claudia's ideas, in order to summarize this first section, we watched how, in an articulate way, Proimágenes works with the different agents of the value chain and promoted several activities in the film industry, which led to the creation of laws that allowed for the creation of incentives, taking advantage of all this groundbreaking work done through different companies that already showed they had a profile to export to international companies. I wouldn't like to dwell on this, just to pinpoint some clear concepts. When we said that when the Ministry of Culture is created at film theaters, there was one Colombian film, and now last year 72, and that speaks to the growth of the volume of the production in the country. On the other hand, all these components, all these instruments that developed the activity have allowed to channel over $200 million through this parafiscal revenue and tax certificates and donations by private parties to film projects. So all this has meant that the film industry has become stronger. This meant that a certain number of companies that were quite strong in this market, they capitalized this opportunity, and they were able to then offer their services to different international projects since 2012 with the first incentive with the Colombian Film Fund, that is a cash provision, as well as tax certificates that we've mentioned, and they were used during the second semester of 2020 during the pandemic, and we're speaking of an investment of about $740 million, which means that there are companies in our country that have understood and become unique in order to provide the services needed at an international level. There's huge variety of projects, feature films, reality shows, series, high impact numbers, over 22,000 airline tickets, hotel nights, people hired. This is just to show you or highlight this growth trend. The only drops that we have observed occurred during the pandemic, but we can see how the collection, that is what feeds the fund, continued to grow. We've continued to grow as well. Conditions have changed. Producing is more costly now, but this financing source continues to allow film production in the country apart from private sources. We can see here the growth of investment certificates and donations to have taxes deducted if private parties invest in film. And this later image shows the growth of Colombian films screened in cinemas. So there are two incentives or mechanisms that are quite strong in the region. One is the Film Fund, and what it does is that Colombian or international countries that produce films in the country, even musical videos or series, have access to a cash fund when they spend a certain amount in the country, subject to a process of audit. So all this process is done through the Colombian Film Commission, that is a project of Proimágenes Colombia, that understands that the way in which to attract audiovisual activity and foreign investment calls for this mechanism of incentives. Through public resources, they were able to guarantee then that international companies or international investment could make it into the country. Since then, the Film Fund means a cash payment that is returned to projects that can prove a certain expense. And then there is the audiovisual investment certificate that is not cash. It doesn't come from the general budget of the country, but it is a fiscal quota. That means it's an amount that the state, the government, is willing to stop getting, because the government understands that the audiovisual activity creates a greater benefit through these investment certificates to promote audiovisual work. So in a way, this tax money is given back. So this is a 1-to-3 relationship. It covers about 35% of expenditure and allows to go for more ambitious targets. And in this way, companies, Colombian service companies that have focused on this model, on this business model, have aimed at players that in the international arena are well known for their content models, and there's an understanding that there is a segmentation of a diversification of business. So let me also share that at the end of these processes, this export potential, this capacity to do simultaneous shoots brings about challenges operationally, given the attention needed to each production, and also in terms of the workforce, to have enough people, I mean, actors, actresses, technicians that will be available to support this work. This last incentive allows for a percentage of this 35% that is returned through this tax certificate that the international project receives, and that can be traded in the stock market and sold to a legal or natural Colombian person that pays taxes in Colombia. So a percentage, 5% of this amount, must be presented in cash, and this amount then must be allocated to training activities, maintenance, operation of the system, and other activities related to production. So what this allows, and we are here now, a project of medium and long term, is to develop a training plan that allows us to understand the existing gaps. What are the needs to train at different level, artistically, technically? What are the abilities or capacities that certain companies, for instance, of the component of the value chain of logistic services, made strengthened so as to boost this business potential? So all in all, I think we're referring to a system that started in 97 to promote an activity. Laws have accompanied this movement, including public funding, in order to attract the private sector, and the companies have continued to generate their own content, and there's a reflection about our narratives. And there are new companies that have become perhaps experts in certain services, so they have allowed to position Colombia as a regional production hub and to finance it with public funds, and therefore to develop Colombian stories. So these companies continue to grow. As I said, there's a lot of work to be done. Let me just round up by saying that this year, the Congress will be hearing the update on the law of culture that will allow us to pinpoint some aspects that have changed, of course, with this deep change of the audiovisual industry in the digital arena, and all the tools that have played a significant role lately in this sector. So this is Proimágenes. We work, as I said, by channeling resources in different ways from different funds and mechanisms that have been created during this past 25 years. And we have experience in working hand in hand with the national government. And speaking of public funds, we also strive to protect private law and discuss at technical level and large knowledge as film commission and interlocutors of the audiovisual industry in the country. So thank you so much. I believe time is running. Yeah, I wonder, should we go to Q&A?
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Diego, for your presentation. We do have some questions from the audience. I will read some of them. First, Miriam was asking, in your experience, what are the three main challenges that cultural and creative industries face in Latin America, and if you have any advice to share with the region? And then a question from Ana Margarita. Could you tell us how you have discussed this, how you developed human talent in Colombia? Did universities participate in this process? Well, let's start with the three main challenges that we have in Latin America. I'm not sure if it's only Latin America or the entire world, but the main one would be how to engage with young audiences who don't go to the movies anymore. This is one challenge because everything has changed so much, and we need to maybe channel this in a different way. Another challenge, especially in the countries in our region, is that we have the potential of speaking the same language, and we share characteristics and making our content circulate. In Colombia, 90% of the movies that you can see in the theaters are American, and maybe 10% are international films, and out of that 10%, only 1% is Latin America. So that's terrible. And then the third challenge, that's for you, Diego.
Sí, yo creo que es hablando un poco de esos recursos que
Because we
perduran en el
mentioned
tiempo, esa
resources
apuesta
that
por
last
esos
over time.
proyectos
So these
nacionales,
projects or
regionales
proposals,
que propician
national
la actividad.
or
Yo creo que
regional, that promote
esas
this activity.
apuestas que permiten una estabilidad en el tiempo para
These
incentivar
proposals that
la producción.
last over time to promote production. And of course, the training. This is a long-term proposal. That would be the first question. And I forgot the second one. Oh, universities, right. I said that the film and TV school was created more or less 35 years ago, and it was the only one available. But now in the country, there are more than 67 institutions that train students in communications, film, TV, audiovisual industries. So, and they are very successful. But of course, they also have a big challenge after the pandemic, which would be dropouts. There are so many online offers, short courses that are sort of filling the gaps or meeting the needs, because people like, young people in particular, like things that are fast. So even though universities have really participated in this process, and they have participated in many of these processes, in Colombia we didn't have a master's degree, for instance, besides the film and TV school in year 2000, and I think it was in 2016. Now we have several master's degrees in cultural management, audiovisual production in the country. And there was no third question. So just to wrap up, Eliel, here you have some links. First, you can subscribe to our newsletters from Proimágenes Colombia. We send a weekly newsletter telling you about the things that we're doing in Colombia. Then we have a digital book for those who would like to dig deeper into what happened in the audiovisual industry in our country. This book was published last year in the context of the 25 years of Proimágenes. And lastly, all information regarding the incentives and the work of the Film Commission. You can find it on allocationcolombia.com. Thank you very much. Claudia and Diego, I have one more question. There were several questions aimed at how to create a binational project with Colombia. And you, Diego, mentioned that Colombia is a regional creation hub, and if there are any spaces for collaboration between Colombia and other countries in the region. I don't know if you can tell us more a bit about that, and then we will wrap up. Well, Diego, you can add to what I'm going to say. We in Colombia, we don't need a co-production treaty in order to produce in the country. With 20% of the money and well, some depending on what kind of film it is, if it is a documentary or fiction, then it is possible to create a co-production with Colombia. So that's why we have made great effort to put together Colombian producers with other producers from other countries, because it's them the ones who can organize and make a project come to life, and they are the ones who need to identify what are the artistic values and the technical values that make sense, and of course the story that makes sense for a co-production. We really like co-productions. I would say that most of the last films done in Colombia, they were regional co-productions. Just to wrap up here, so the importance of this promoting at events where you would usually have producers meet each other, maybe in LA or Bogota Audiovisual Market in Colombia in July. So these events, these networking events, that allow for people to meet, and then we can understand what's the potential. That's how Proimágenes sees it, and that's why we actually promote this sort of event in order to boost this project. Well, yes, thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Diego, for joining us. Now, we will start with our conversation with Pablo Culell. Well, many of you know him very well. For those who don't know him, Pablo has more than 30 years of experience producing fiction. He comes from the private sector. He has a degree in journalism. He started his career in the 90s as executive producer in Canal 13 Buenos Aires. He was also general producer of Ideas del Sur. He worked with shows like Los Roldán, Tumberos, shows that were awarded over 30 prizes nationally and internationally. From 2006, he's also participating in Underground, this company by Sebastián Ortega, and he was also in charge of the general production of La Lola and the very famous show Graduados. He also participated in the Academy of TV Arts and Sciences of the Emmy Awards. Executive producer of some very recent success, like Gallo for Esculapio and El Marginal. He's also professor and has also participated in theater and with Underground, now part of NBC Universal. He is VP of the content development and leader of a teleseries for Telemundo. So having said this, welcome, Pablo. It's an honor to have you here with us. Well, thank you, Eliel. Greetings to all the participants. First of all, I wanted to say hello to Claudia and Diego. What they shared was very important, and they really highlighted the importance of a public policy. And in Latin America, Colombia is definitely a success story, something to take into account, because sadly, it's not what happens in other countries. So it was very interesting to hear what they had to say. So thank you also for inviting me. Well, to start with our conversation, there are many people in the audience who come from the industry, but for those who are not part of this industry, I wanted to start with maybe an explanation of what's the role of a general producer, and maybe what are the different kinds of profile, different workers and companies that participate in the creation of audiovisual content. A general producer, I mean, that's what we call them in Argentina in particular. That's where we are based. Most of my career was in Argentina. Is the person who carries out a project from its conception, from the beginning of the idea until it is finished and it is released. So there are different steps of management. You have to find investment. You have to create this audiovisual product. If it is fiction, you need to find the talent, the technical talent too, and based on, well, you base yourself on the story, the screenplay, and we need to find the best client for this product. So it's a manager for this project. And then, of course, there are different levels within the production in general, but the executive producer is in charge of all these macro projects. When it comes to the different kinds of professionals, well, nowadays, I would say that in most countries in the world, this is a profession that requires you to be trained. Even though for many years people just had the experience, with time people became more specialized, and now you have university degrees that allow you to study it. You can study image and video design, or filmmaking, communication sciences. It depends on what each person feels they're passionate, and you have different options. But to work in the world of production, you have specific courses for audiovisual creation. So that would be more or less the profile of the professionals, and that's what perhaps you should aim at if you want to be a part of this world. A producer is a very holistic person, because they need to know a little bit of everything. 30 years ago, when I started to work in this industry, I studied communication science, and at that point, maybe filmmaking or production was not so specific. In my case, because I was interested in fiction, I also studied screenwriting, screenplay writing. I wanted to know how a story was written, because I would say that would be the raw material for any any project of this kind. It's interesting to know how to, I mean, the filmmaking aspect, and what each of the parts of this process entails. even though you will not be in charge of the specific technical aspects, you need to know a little bit of everything so you can understand how you can tell a story besides the narrative of the screenplay. You need to understand how you can make this come to life. Also, knowing a little bit about acting and directing. So it's very important to know a little bit of everything if you want to be a producer. Great. Thank you, Pablo. Then, I mean, you are producer of El Marginal. I mean, El Marginal is a success in Argentina, but it has also been very successful in other countries, even outside Latin America, thanks to Netflix. I understand that there are many people from Mexico, and it was called El Recluso in Mexico. So could you tell us a little bit about the journey of this series from its beginning until it was internationalized, and then the success that it had? And then I don't know if you can tell us a little bit about the role of the state and public policy at the beginning of this process. El Marginal, for those of you who don't know about it, it's an Argentine series. It's a story that takes place in a Latin American jail, actually Argentina. In 2016, when it was released, there were still some public policy and help from the public sector. Argentina, you know, has many, I mean, changes its policies in the industry all the time. I mean, so there are different political moments, and we could speak about this for hours. But at that point, the public national TV had a budget for fiction, and they hire different production companies to create different fictions to make them as successful as possible, because they wanted to captivate the audiences, for the audience to actually watch this public channel. And they called production companies that had a lot of experience. And our production company, Underground, would be some sort of a boutique production company. We create very specific content, and that is not aimed at the commercial aspect, but also perhaps that has some artistic ideas. Of course, it's not like we don't think about the business part, but we had a very specific perspective when it came to the artistic aspect. The creative director is Sebastián Ortega. I have been working with him for the last 20 years. So we created Underground 18 years ago. We worked together in Ideas del Sur. And we always had a very particular way of thinking of projects. We wanted to provide quality content, but also we wanted to create fictions and productions that had an impact in public discussion. We wanted to have them to have an impact in society, to perhaps make them thought-provoking. And this would make the series more thin, but also we wanted to, well, make an impact in society. El Marginal, we thought, would be a series that, besides the entertainment part, would also create public discussion regarding what happens in Latin American prisons, human rights topic, everything that we can imagine happening in prison. But of course, always knowing that it is fiction, it's a story. We needed heroes and villains, even though they're all criminals, let's say. But the audience would empathize with some characters a bit more than with others. This series wanted to show in a very real way what happens in prison. This actually was filmed in a former prison in Caseros. There was a very satirical sense of humor, and we really wanted to tell a story that would engage the audience. Public television bought this series. It was made with very low budget, and when it was released, the repercussion was quite big, especially considering that this channel was the least seen in the country. Due to all the great criticism that it received, and also the series received an award from Europe, and one of the judges of this jury said that it was interesting to see a Latin American prison. For an American, that would be exotic, but it was very realist. But at the same time, the sense of humor that was very ironic would make it, a little bit easier to watch, because it's a very dark story anyway. I mean, similar to what The Sopranos did, right? This judge was a part of the production of The Sopranos. There was an alliance between the national television and an international company, and this happened in 2016, 17, and for Netflix to release it. So when we thought about a series that would have a beginning and an end, a mini series with 13 episodes, we didn't think that it would continue. I mean, it was a boom. The series was a boom, not only in Argentina, but actually in the rest of the world, the rest of Latin America, even in Europe, things that we had never thought about. And that made Netflix tell us, well, we are interested in more seasons. Due to this success, because they recovered investment and everything was really great in that sense, it's a very successful story where the public and the private work together. It was a co-production with the sale of the rights to Netflix. It was not only an artistic success, but also a commercial success. It was great business for everyone. So national, the public television, which was now being managed by another government, said, okay, let's continue with this TV series, and it continues producing the show for seasons 2 and 3. And then, well, we had to change a couple of things creatively because the series had an ending, so we had to go back creatively, and so we went to a prequel that also created a lot of repercussion, and the series continued growing.
Marginal nos abrió las puertas del mundo, de la visibilidad, e hizo que una compañía como NBC, Telemundo, ponga los ojos en una empresa del sur del mundo, como es Argentina, como es Buenos Aires y como era
And
y
perhaps pay attention to us and purchased it about a month before the pandemic, and being part of Telemundo, and of course it's open public TV. There was a change of government, a decision not to continue investment, but Netflix together with Telemundo takes care of seasons 4 and 5, which become a huge international success, fortunately, which means that there's even a remake in Mexico where the audience perhaps is more nationalist, and it's not as easy to get to this market. And so The Inmate was the Mexican version, came out. Netflix then, after having completed this 5 seasons of this series that takes place in a male jail, and asked us to do the female version. So we're doing the female version for Netflix, also produced by Telemundo Studios. That is the sequel of this series, The Marginal. And there's something, Pablo, that I must ask you, and it is the role of streaming platforms. And perhaps you will tell us, but maybe this presented a change. So that's why I wanted to ask you, how do you think this has affected technology? I mean, especially streaming platforms in terms of broadcasting all over the world. How has it affected Latin America and the Caribbean? Well, of course, it's modified things 100% in terms of distribution and the reach to the world. Maybe they would have been they would have made it before as a format. Sometimes you see that in some countries it is liked, but in other countries, because of style or idiosyncrasy, the public finds no interest. So you purchase the format, you purchase the script, and you replicate it with actors of this region. In this case was the case of the inmate. And this is mostly the case. And for instance, Mexican soap operas that made it in Argentina, but also Desperate Housewives, for instance, US, that were done in different versions with different actors and actresses. So perhaps what didn't happen is that in the same platform, you might have Latin American productions, US productions, European, Turkish, Korean, and they would have huge success. And perhaps in the past, this was unfathomed. So again, like the public today consumes the production apart from the country of origin. You just change the language. There's dubbing or even subtitles. So a lot of possibility. They can see it all together, like in a marathon or episode by episode. So platforms give this freedom, and of course they work with algorithms, and we are familiar with this since Netflix made this public. So who watches what, and like so guides this person's interest or what this person will be watching. In most countries, apart from huge tanks, huge artists all over the place, and especially the world entertainment power, that is, of course, the US with their huge Hollywood talent and tanks, and I'm speaking of film and series. And so leaving aside this case that we are all familiar with, the public usually chooses to watch their own production. Especially we can see this in platforms when we see, okay, what happened with a film when a country was doing films, but people didn't watch them, so it was a failure. And today on these platforms, films that didn't make it ended up being a huge success because the public, having paid a certain fee a monthly, perhaps gives it a try, listens, watches rather national productions. And perhaps they wouldn't have gone to the movies for this film, but they watch it on Netflix. So visibility, the drive that has been given to countries that didn't receive a lot of attention before is happening. And so this, of course, represents an incentive to every region, apart from specific country cases where there may be policies that boost audiovisual production. Some other countries do not. Colombia, Uruguay are examples of success. For instance, Uruguay, as well as Colombia, has, of course, they have different settings, and Uruguay is not a country that produces their own content, but they are looked for in order to shoot there. They have great artists, great technicians, but Uruguay, for instance, doesn't have a tradition of having Uruguayan series or sitcoms, but it has become a production center where everyone goes to shoot there. They have a great array of possibilities, and they have their own school. In the past years, there are new technicians and many Argentine productions, because Argentina doesn't have incentive policies, go to Uruguay, and Argentine sitcoms are shot in Uruguay, and they are successful. So the change has been immense from the viewpoint of broadcasting and how the public reacts. But in terms of production, this depends on incentives, perhaps, and how platforms may show an interest in the market or not, depending on the number of subscribers, the bigger the event. It's not the same to have a 40 million inhabitant country as a 3 million inhabitant country. So the platforms will intervene or decide to produce differently in different regions, right? Thank you, Pablo. And let me ask you, because you know, there's diverse audience, but also some producers, and perhaps in terms of your experience, what would you say to someone that today is trying to sell a TV show to another country in the region, or even the US or Europe or another destination? I mean, what is called for by the international market?
Mira, yo te diría que
Well,
siempre, esa es la gran pregunta
this is the
que
big
todos nos
question
hacemos todo
that
el
we
tiempo y todos los que
ask
estamos en este
ourselves all
medio,
the
¿no? ¿Qué
time
tenemos que hacer
in this
para
industry. What
generar
do we
negocios?
need to do to
En
do
este
business?
punto es muy cambiante,
This is something that
porque
changes
cada,
constantly,
digamos, cada búsqueda que pueda hacer una
because
plataforma
each
hoy puede ser
search that a
vieja dentro
platform does
de
today
un
could be
mes.
old in
Entonces
a
te dicen,
month.
bueno, estamos
So
buscando
they can
true
tell you, well,
crimes
we
o
are
thrillers
looking
juveniles
for
o ficciones
youth
eróticas, porque tal
thrillers
vez
or
funcionaron
erotic
esas,
fiction,
pero en el momento
because
que vos
those
las
were
vendés,
successful.
hasta que se
But when
producen y hasta que
you
salen,
sell them,
pasó
and
un
then until they
año
are
o más,
produced
porque
and
mucho
created,
el tiempo de
a
producción,
year has
negociación y
gone
demás,
by,
y
because
ya
the
dejó de
negotiation stage
interesar.
is
Y
long
también
and people are not
porque
interested
cambian
anymore.
las
And
miradas que se
also
tienen. En un
because the
momento se hacían,
perspectives change all the
bueno,
time.
hubo
At
un
some point,
momento
um,
bisagra que fue la pandemia, donde
well,
las
pandemic, of
plataformas
course,
vieron que lógicamente
was
el
a
público
pivotal
estaba
moment.
ahí, quería
The
ver, estaba todo
platform
el día en su
saw
casa
that
y quería ver
the
ficción
audience was there and they wanted
o
to see
todo tipo de
fiction.
contenido y lógicamente se quedó
And of
prácticamente
course,
sin producciones porque pusieron todo lo que
they
tenían,
didn't
entonces
have any
ni bien
productions left
se
because they
levantaron las
just
restricciones,
released
empezó a
everything.
grabar lo que
So
fuera,
after the restrictions, everyone was
y
just
bueno,
creating
derivó como
whatever.
una burbuja que terminó
And there was a
estallando y
bubble that
lógicamente
exploded, and
hubo que dar
we
marcha
had to
atrás
calm
y
down a
ordenar un
little
poco la
bit
cosa.
and reorganize
Y
the
ahí se pensó,
situation.
bueno, hagamos todo
And
tipo
at
de
that point,
contenido
everyone
porque
said,
el
okay, let's
público
make
quiere ver de
different
todo.
kinds of
Y después
content because the
se
audience
empezaron a dar
wants to
cuenta
see a bit
que
of everything.
en
And
realidad
then
el
they
público ante todo
realized
quiere ver
that
sus
the audience wants to see
historias que lo representen, que lo identifiquen. Entonces, por
stories
lo
that
general,
they
que
can
cada
relate
país
to.
hiciera eso era
And each
importante porque el
country
público no iba a
had to
buscar
do that
a
because that was important.
actores solamente
The
hablando
audience would
neutro
not
para que se
look
entienda para
for
Latinoamérica.
example, actors that were
No,
speaking
el
in this
público quiere ver
neutral
cosas
Spanish. No, the
reales o que
audience
se
wants to see
identifique
real
de manera
things that they
directa y
can
no viendo a un
relate
actor
to
haciendo de
directly,
otro
and
que vive
not
en otro
maybe to
lado
see
por el
an
solo hecho del
actor
negocio.
playing a role of
Digamos, hablando
someone
así
who
en
is from
genérico
another
para que se entienda lo que
country.
quiero decir.
Just, I
Entonces se
mean, I want
empezó a
to be as
hablar más
clear as
que
possible. So,
el local global, eso de siempre
so
crear un
this
producto que
local
sea para todo
global
el
thing,
mundo.
right? We create
No,
a product
busca un
locally
producto que
for the
sea
entire world.
exitoso en el
No,
país de origen de
we
aquellos que
make
lo están
a
creando, que lo
product
están
that will be
escribiendo, que lo están
successful in
produciendo.
the country of
Si eso funciona
origin
bien en el país
where
de
that is
origen,
being made.
seguramente va a funcionar
If
bien
that
en otras partes
works
del mundo
in this
o
country of
no,
origin, it will
pero
probably work well in
vos
other
te
parts of the world,
asegurás
or maybe
un
it
mercado
won't.
especial
But
que
at
la
least you
plataforma
know that there will
necesita,
be a special
¿no?
market
Quiere captar un
that the
público
platform needs.
joven en Argentina, bueno,
They want
hagamos una
to
serie para el público joven
engage with a
argentino. Si
young
después
Argentine
eso
audience. We need a series for
funciona
them.
fuera
If then
de las
this work
fronteras, mejor,
outside
¿no? Y ahí es
Argentina,
un poco lo que
well,
pasó
all the
justamente con El
better.
Marginal. Se hizo
And
una
that's
serie para
actually
acá
something
y
that
tenía
happened
algo
with
del
El Marginal.
lenguaje.
It was
Lógicamente que
a
acá
series
después
for
sí,
us.
si uno se pone a analizar el
I
contenido,
mean,
dice,
of
bueno, a
course,
ver,
sure, when you analyze the
siempre es
content,
interesante que más allá de que vos
it's
le hables
always
a un público determinado, un
interesting
público
to
objetivo,
speak, of course, to a
tengas una matriz
specific
universal, o
audience,
sea, que esa
but then you
historia
need to
pueda ser
have this
entendida en otras
universal
partes del mundo,
matrix, something
que
that
se
can be
cuente una
understood in
historia
other
que vos
parts
la
of the
puedas
world.
entender,
You need
no
a story that is sort of universal,
que todo lo que esa historia está
and
presentando sea
that
aceptada en todas
not
partes del mundo, porque cada
all,
uno,
I mean, it's not that
las
all
distintas
parts of the
regiones y
world
demás,
will
tienen su
accept what this
cultura, sus
story
leyes,
presents
sus
because there are
costumbres,
different
pero es genuino lo que
cultures
sucede. Entonces
and
uno lo puede entender,
cultures.
puede decir, bueno, a mí no
So
me pasa eso, acá no pasa
we
eso,
want
pero
to
puedo entender lo que
tell
les
a story
pasa a
that is
ellos, ¿no?
authentic, and even though maybe other
Entonces,
countries
el
cannot
local
relate
para
to it
local,
culturally, they can
digamos que
understand
es
what's happening.
importante.
So it's important
Obviamente que
that
hoy
we create locally for local.
todo se
That is
globalizó
important.
mucho. Yo, de hecho, estoy perteneciendo a una compañía
For instance,
norteamericana
now, I
que
mean, everything has
obviamente nos
changed. I
ocupamos de
belong to
hacer
an American company
series
now,
para
for instance.
Latinoamérica y para las
We
plataformas y tenemos
make
la base en Argentina.
series for
Tenemos
Latin
producciones
America,
para
and
Argentina y
our
luego tenemos
base
producciones
is
internacionales, pero
Argentina. We have
ese es
productions
un
for
rol
Argentina,
más
and then
abarcativo
international
hoy
productions.
día,
It's a
donde
little bit more
trabajamos con
general
profesionales de
role.
todas partes del
We work
mundo,
with
cada uno tiene
professionals from
su
different
función y
parts of
uno
the
tiene una
world. Everyone
experiencia
has
que
their
hace que uno
own
pueda mirar de manera un poco
role,
más
and they
global,
have their experience
pero
that
cuando
provides
uno
you a more
quiere
global
productos para
perspective.
México,
But
busca
when you
gente
want products
mexicana
for
o
Mexico, you
gente
look
que
for
conozca
Mexican
realmente el
people
público
or people who
mexicano
really
y lo
know the
hace con
Mexican
talentos
audience.
mexicanos, ¿no?
And
Más
you do
allá
this
de
with
la visión de
Mexican
negocio.
talent,
Pero yo creo
besides
que hoy hay una
the
apertura
vision
muy
for the
grande, no
business.
solamente
But
se
I would say that
buscan,
today
por
there is a lot
supuesto,
of openness.
los grandes jugadores de esta
We have
industria
the big
tratan de chicar
players of
riesgo
the
porque la
industry,
plata
and
les
they, of course,
sobra,
want
los
to
suscriptores
make
tampoco.
risks as small as possible.
Entonces, por lo general buscan empresas que
So they
respaldan, que les
try to
garanticen que las
find
producciones van a llegar a buen
companies
puerto,
that,
pero también es real que
you
buscan
know, have the
autores
experience, but they
directamente,
are also looking for
porque lo
authors
más importante
directly,
siguen
for
siendo
instance.
las ideas, los
Because at the
contenidos,
end, the most
y
important thing,
a esos
would
autores
be
se los
ideas.
contrata
So
con un
they
proyecto
hire
en particular
authors
y después viene
with
una
a
casa productora,
specific
depende del país
project
de
in
origen, lo que
mind,
sea, y se va
with a
armando
production company in
entre
the country, and
varios
then with all these
la
different elements,
producción en específico.
you create this production.
Muy interesante lo que marcás, pues
That's
teníamos
very
justamente algunas preguntas
interesting.
que
We had some
apuntaban a
questions
cómo se
related to
cómo
that.
se debe, digamos, de alguna manera adaptar o readaptar el
I mean, for
contenido
example,
cuando se
if you
exporta un
should
contenido
adapt
y
the
demás
content when you are going to
al
export it,
exterior. Así que
Que se
that,
puede
that, that
adaptar
was a
desde
question.
ya,
Of
porque
course, you can adapt
obviamente
it.
puede ser que una historia,
Maybe there is
es el ejemplo que yo di recién
a story, and this is
del
an
marginal.
example
Ya hablo de esto
that
porque
I
venimos a
share
hablar
with
de
El
esto para no
Marginal.
abrir más,
I mean,
porque es un producto
I talk
bastante
about this
conocido.
because I don't want to talk about something
Se adaptó a
different.
México, o sea,
El Marginal was
lógicamente, si
adapted in
a pesar
Mexico,
de presentarlo en plataformas, la plataforma
even
ve
though
que en
we
algunos mercados no tiene
released
el
it
mismo
in the
éxito que en
platforms,
otros,
and
uno
they
dice,
saw
pero
that
acá
it
tienes
wasn't
un
as
público que lo
successful
multiplica porque es
in other countries,
enorme,
but
entonces decís,
in
bueno,
Mexican
vale la pena que
audience,
esta serie
well,
se cuente para
it
ese
is
público de
worth
manera
it
directa.
to tell
Entonces,
this
por
story
supuesto
for
que
this
uno
audience
tiene que
in
estar
particular
abierto a la
directly.
posible
So you
adaptación
need
desde
to be
ya.
open to an
tengo
adaptation for
una pregunta
sure.
más y después ya
I
pasamos
have
a las
one
preguntas del
question, and then
público.
maybe we can go to the
Digo,
Q&A with the with the audience.
pensando, digo, ¿qué estrategia le recomendarías
What
o le darías
strategy would
a
you
aquella empresa
recommend to a
latinoamericana
Latin
del
American
sector que quiere
company
salir de su
in
país
the
al mundo?
industry that
Digo,
want
¿a
to
qué puerta tocar? ¿A qué feria ir?
go
¿Ver
to the
repercusiones o
world?
no?
So
La ayuda
which
de ir a
doors to
una,
knock on?
digamos, a
What
una
are the steps that
distribuidora
they should take?
para
Should they
ayudar en ese
talk to a
proceso? Digo,
distributor?
¿a qué desafíos se va a enfrentar?
What are some of the challenges
Bueno,
that they
estamos
will face?
hablando de empresas más chicas, ¿no? Tal vez
Well, we
sí,
are
es un
talking
grupo
about
underground que
smaller
nosotros llamamos productora
companies, right?
boutique porque hacía
Underground,
obras muy
we
de
would call
autor
it a boutique production company because
o
we would make these
guionistas que están,
specific
digamos, empezando, tienen algo.
productions.
Siempre está bueno,
Or maybe
digamos, cuando
for a
uno dice al
screenwriter who's
mundo,
just starting
tener
out, whenever
algo,
you want
¿no?
to
Como
go to the
base,
world,
eso
it's always
te va a
good to have
ayudar a que,
something as
bueno,
a
ya existe
foundation
alguna cosa
that will help
o tenés
you
alguna referencia
show that
importante.
you have
Pero
already
la
done
hayas tenido o no
something.
la tengas, uno tiene
But
que tener un
even
buen
if you don't
producto,
have
por
that, you
supuesto,
need to have a
en el
good
que tienen que
product,
creer.
and
Y
you
yo
need
les
to
diría
believe
algo,
in your
no
product. And
copien
I would
nada,
tell you,
no busquen
don't
nada
copy
molde.
anything.
Lleven algo que tenga
You need to
corazón,
come up with
algo que
something
ustedes
that
sientan
shows
y
your
ustedes solo
passion,
lo pueden
that
contar.
has a
Que la
heart,
persona con la
something
que se
that
van a
only
sentar
you can tell.
le puedan decir, este es el show que ustedes necesitan, esta es
That
la
you can
serie que
go to
ustedes
a person
necesitan.
and tell them, this
Lo que
is the
yo
show that
tengo
you
no está
need.
en otro
What
lado,
I
porque
have, you
yo
won't
siempre digo
find
lo
it
mismo.
anywhere
Hoy
else.
día uno dice, bueno, ya está todo contado.
Today, maybe
Puede
people
ser
say,
que no esté
well,
contado, pero no
everything
todo
has
está contado del
been
mismo modo.
said, but
Entonces no
not
importa
everything
tanto
has
qué
been said
cuente,
in the
sino
same
cómo lo
way. So
cuento.
sometimes it's
que qué
not
es el
so much
cómo. Y
what
después la
we tell, but
particularidad que
how
tiene un
we tell
creador, que
it.
tiene un
And
productor,
this
que tiene un
how
director, que
is
tiene un
what a
guionista para
producer,
contar una
director,
historia y que sea
screenwriter
diferente a
has
otras.
to tell a story
Entonces,
and
más
make
que
it
el
different
qué,
from other
que a todos
stories.
se nos pueden ocurrir
So,
historias parecidas,
besides the
similares,
what,
obvio, y más
because
en
of course we can all
en
think
este
about
mundo
similar
en donde
stories
tenés todo el
in this
tiempo,
world where
miles y miles de
you
horas de
have
ficción,
thousands
lógicamente,
of hours of
pero
fiction, of
la
course we
manera en
can
que
tell the
vamos a
same
contar una
thing. But the
historia es lo que
way
te va a
you
hacer
tell a
distinto.
story,
Por
that
supuesto que si
will
a eso vos lo
set you apart.
acompañaste un artista
If you
importante que cree
have
en tu
that
historia y vos te quedás
connected
pegado,
to an
enganchado,
artist
decís, pero mira,
that
estoy con
really
tal actriz o
believes in
con
your
tal actor
story, I
porque me
have
interesa,
this
tengo una
actor
intención de que este
who
guión
wants to
que tiene esta
participate in
particularidad,
the screenplay
que puede ser de cualquier tipo de
that
género,
is
pero puede tener
special
oportunidad
because
y que tal
of
vez está tocando una
reason.
temática de hoy
Maybe the
que llama
topic
la
of the
atención en cualquier
screenplay
parte
is
del mundo
very
porque está muy en
relevant
boga o
in all
porque
parts of the world,
uno siente que tiene un
or
lenguaje
perhaps you
moderno
feel that
o
it has a very
porque es
modern
polémico
language,
o lo que
or maybe
sea,
it is
pero ante todo
controversial
tiene que tener una
or whatever,
narrativa
but
que
you need
sea
to have a
entendible en el
narrative
país
that
de
can be
origen y
understood
también,
in the
como bien
country of
dije, una
origin.
matriz
But
universal
as
que
I
pueda ser
said,
adaptable.
there is a
Y
universal
va
matrix that
atachado o a un
can
director
make it
célebre
adaptable.
o
And if it is
que puede ser del
attached
mismo país
to
donde yo estoy llevando
a
el
famous
producto, o un
director,
actor, una
or
actriz
perhaps an
importante,
actor
seguramente va a ser
who
más
is well
fácil
known,
llegar.
then it will probably be
Existen ferias,
easier
sí, claro, existen
to
muchas,
to
pero
sell this.
digamos que
There
las más
are
conocidas
fairs,
internacionalmente
yes,
son Los Ángeles
but
Screen, que se hace
internationally
en
we have
mayo,
Los Angeles Screening in
está
May,
Content Americas, antes llamado Natrio, en
Content
Miami, que se
America
hace en enero,
in Miami in January.
bueno, está Cannes,
We have Cannes
en
in
MIPCOM, en
France.
Cannes, que hay una también a principio de año y otra a fin de año.
And
Y
we
hay
have the
distintas
midpoint at the
ferias
beginning of the year,
en
at the end of
donde
the year. There are
existe
different
la
fairs
compra
where you
de
sell
producciones, de contenidos
productions
y donde uno
and
se puede
buy productions,
presentar,
and you
se
can
anota, se
introduce
inscribe y
yourself to other
participa
people.
de
You
esas y
just
busca
sign
los
up, you
distintos clientes
participate,
donde
and
uno
you
puede
look
pitchear
for the
las
clients. You
producciones que
pitch
tiene.
them
A
your
veces es
idea.
interesante, si uno no tiene una
Sometimes it is
guardaespaldas,
interesting if you
contratar a un
don't have a
distribuidor
lot of
que
support.
que
Maybe
lo
it's
ayude, al menos en
interesting
la primera
to
instancia, todo
hire
para llegar,
a
para hacerse
distributor,
visible.
at least,
Este
for
mundo
the very
requiere ante
first
todo de
times.
talento, por
What we need in the
supuesto,
world, of
de
course, is
conocimiento,
talent. We
de
need
a quién yo me
knowledge,
voy a presentar,
who
porque uno no puede
I'm
ir
going to
a presentarse
introduce
sin tener
myself
una idea de
to.
qué puede ser, quiénes son esas personas,
We need to
qué están
know
buscando en ese
who our
momento.
targets are,
Y
let's
también
say.
de vínculos, ¿no?
And then
ver,
also
bueno, cómo yo me vinculo
networking,
con uno, con otro, para que una
how
cosa se
I
presento, para ir de la mano.
connect with one person or
Creo
another
que
so they can
no
help
hay
me with this
una
project.
manera, no hay una
There
manera.
isn't
Pero
just
lo que no hay
one
que
way,
quedarse con los brazos
but
cruzados y decir yo no
we
voy a
need
poder, porque
to
se
do
puede,
something, okay?
por
It's
supuesto, si uno tiene el
not good if
talento y
we
creer lo
just
que va a
stay
presentar.
there and think, oh, I will not be able to do it. You have
Teníamos una
to
pregunta acá de
um,
Nicolás
go
López,
out
entiendo
there.
del
We have a
gobierno
question from
de la
Nicolas
provincia de
Lopez.
San Luis de Argentina. Nos
He's
decía,
from the province
quiero
of San
consultarte
Luis
puntualmente
government.
por
I
cómo
wanted to
comenzar
ask
desde una
you specifically
provincia,
how can we
en este
start
caso
on
donde
a
está, en este
province,
caso
a
San Luis
provincial
de
level,
Argentina, desde las
in the
políticas
case of San Luis,
públicas, cómo,
with public
cómo
policy.
hacer que la provincia se convierta
How can we
en un
make a
player importante en la
province
producción de contenidos? ¿En
become
qué
an
haría
important
foco
player in
teniendo
the
4 años para
in
desarrollar
content production?
alguna estrategia
If we
integral?
have four
Si nos
years
puedes
to
dar algunos
develop this
tips.
integral
Yo recuerdo que San Luis en un
strategy.
momento
I
fue un
remember that San
polo
Luis at some
de
point
atracción audiovisual, después hubo distintos
had
cuestionamientos
different
que hacen
incentives.
a cuestiones políticas de una mirada o del otro
Then,
lado, que,
well, of
como
course,
dije
there
antes,
was a lot of
no,
questioning
no
regarding to
vale
politics. Anyway, it's not
decirlo
worth
aquí o ponerse
going
a hablar de eso
there.
aquí, pero sí es importante
But yes,
el fomento y las
it is
políticas públicas
important
cuando las
to
cosas están
promote
dentro del
through
marco de la
public
ley,
policy
hechas de
whenever
manera
the things
idónea, con
are
ética.
done
Pero lo que yo te
legally.
diría es que, mira, el
What I
caso
would
de
suggest
Turquía es maravilloso.
that is that, for example, the
Turquía,
case of Turkey, that
gracias a
is
las telenovelas, no
wonderful.
diría que solo
Thanks
gracias a las
to
telenovelas, sino al fomento que se le dio a
TV
la industria
series
audiovisual, en donde
in Turkey,
el
they have
gobierno, el
really
Estado,
promoted the
potenció el
audiovisual
turismo,
industry,
o sea,
and
presentó
actually
ese país
the
desde el punto de
government
vista de lo
presented the
exótico que podía ser para
country
el resto
as
del mundo en
exotic
su
through the
idiosincrasia, en sus
TV
costumbres,
series,
en
showing
sus
their
bellezas
customs, traditions,
naturales y demás,
a
con
wonderful
las
nature
telenovelas, con el
through the TV
melodrama
series,
clásico. La
and
telenovela
with
es el género
the
que más
typical melodrama
viaja en
from
el
a
mundo, ¿no?
telenovela.
Desde siempre. El melodrama y la
This
telenovela es un
melodrama
género que no hay con
made
qué
people
darle. En todas partes
interested
del mundo
in
siempre es
Turkey.
exitoso.
I mean,
Y entonces
melodrama is always
utilizaron su
successful, so they
talento para el
used their
melodrama, que es una
talent
costumbre
for
andaluz,
melodrama
no pueden gustar
with
más,
their
menos, pero
customs and
bueno,
traditions.
son
Perhaps you
sus
like it
costumbres, su
more or less.
idiosincrasia. Estamos hablando acá
It's their
del hecho
culture.
artístico, no de otras cuestiones.
We're just
Y
talking about the artistic
potenciaron
fact. And what they
presentar
did
a
is they
Turquía
boosted
como un gran escenario.
Turkey as a
Y
great
ese mix que se
stage.
dio entre
And this
turismo,
mix between tourism,
audiovisual y políticas
the
de Estado
audiovisual
hicieron
sector,
que
and
Turquía
public
creciera
policy, this made
exponencialmente en
Turkey
turismo
grow
justamente, que entraran
exponentially
divisas al
in
país, no
tourism.
solamente la
So they
renta
had
audiovisual, sino que la
income
gente diga,
coming
quiero
from the
conocer ese
audiovisual
país
content,
porque
but
me
also
interesa
people going to the
su
country
cultura, me
because they
gusta
were interested in its culture,
sus maravillas naturales,
tradition, the
y
natural beauty that they saw in the TV series. And they created a huge business. I would not say that it surpassed Mexico, but they became leaders in the audiovisual industry. So maybe an Argentine province, for example, San Luis, that has a lot of natural beauty, maybe something like that could be done. You can really boost the tourism aspect with public policy, and the promotion would be providing different incentives to production companies. You bring work and we will help you somehow with maybe tax exemptions or whatever. So it's a bit what Claudia and Diego mentioned that they are doing in Colombia, and it's also what's happening in Uruguay. People go to Uruguay to film because we don't have the incentives, even though, well, the city of Buenos Aires is trying to do that, but it's not as strong as it is in other parts of the world. I mean, now I'm part of this North American company, and everything is potentially interesting. But when we talk about Argentina, our country, and San Luis, a wonderful province, first of all, we need to sit down with Colombians or Uruguayans and to learn from their experience and see how that could be adapted to San Luis. So to see what can be done within the province and how to really promote the province for it to become the stage for producers to go and make productions there. We had a question here that I think speaks a bit about the change of context. If somebody has seen El Marginal from the beginning till now, how do you face the challenge of producing these new seasons of El Marginal? What things do you take into account regarding the business that perhaps at the beginning you were not really thinking of?
Bueno, en principio,
well, to start with, the sequel became a Netflix original series. And knowing how successful it was, well, then you have 2 seasons. I mean, we filmed 2 seasons at the same time. They trust us, and that's a lot better because if it creates more work, there's a bigger budget, you have more time, because of course the series requires requires a bit more from the talent perspective and the technical aspect. So the good thing, I mean, you never know what's going to happen when it comes to success, but you can anticipate that maybe taking into account certain factors, there are more chances of being successful. Of course, it has to do with risk reduction. You have more coverage, you have a bigger budget. Maybe they can tell you, well, instead of 1 season, it will be 2. So this, of course, makes you feel at ease as a producer when you are working. When it comes to the content itself, this is a constant challenge. Of course, we have the experience of the things that we have done before, not only in this show in particular, but other shows. You change language a little bit. The viewer is not as patient as it was before. They give you just a couple of seconds for you to make an impact on them because the offer is so wide. I mean, sure, I mean, I'm talking about mainstream audiences. There is an audience that's a bit more specific, but when we think about the big tank, the big productions, the mainstream, we need to consider all of this. And young audiences who don't watch series or audiovisual content in the same way, they basically, I mean, they use TikTok, and that's only seconds. They will not be waiting 5 minutes for you to explain a situation. Hitchcock, right? You have the bomb under the seat. You need to put that. You need to do that in the first 5 seconds because you need to understand that there is a bomb. Then, well, you can go back and go forward and you can explain everything. But the first 10 seconds, you need to catch their attention. Something needs to happen. So something that we started incorporating in fiction, they want a teaser. So tell in 1 minute, maybe it's not really what you will say in your story, but you need to tease the audience for them to stay, for you to fall in love with the story and for them to empathize with the characters. You need some time, but I mean, you will not fall in love in 10 seconds. But if there is something visually striking, maybe it's okay. I will watch this 2 more minutes. Oh, I like them. Maybe 10 minutes. So you're constantly hooking the audience.
Bueno, todas esas cosas sí han ido cambiando.
So these
la
things have
narrativa en
changed
función
in
de los
the
públicos, las
in the
audiencias, ¿no?
narrative. I mean, based on
Bien.
the
Tenemos
audiences.
una última pregunta. Y
One
con esto
last
sí,
question,
ya cerramos.
and we will wrap up with that.
Hablamos vos hablabas un poco de
You
la mayor oferta que
mentioned
hay,
the
digamos,
bigger
de
offer out there,
plataformas. Entonces, en
different
este contexto,
platforms. So in this
¿cómo
context,
publicitar hoy una serie
how
en
can you
2024?
advertise
¿Y qué
a
rol juegan
series
ahí
in
las redes
2024,
sociales,
and
¿no?
what's the role of social
También me
media?
parece que puede ser interesante.
Which I suppose,
Bueno,
well,
el
this could be interesting to
80%,
discuss.
te
I would
diría,
say 80%.
del marketing hoy se da en las redes
80%
sociales.
of marketing is done on
Digamos
social
que siempre
media.
tenés que dejar un porcentaje importante
You
para
always
un público
need
que
a
le parece un encanto
percentage
eso, que
for
yo te diría que hoy es
an audience
el
that
más
doesn't really
40, más
consume that.
45, más
I would say
50.
that would be
De
people
40
who
para
are
abajo
older
están
than
metidos en las
40
redes a
years
full y la
old.
gente más
Then
grande,
under
como
40
yo
years old, they're
también,
all in social
pero tal
media.
vez
And
desde otro lugar, ¿no?
well, maybe they do
Buscamos también la
participate in social media,
información que
but
te puede dar el
from a
periódico, una
different
revista,
standpoint.
la
You
vía
look for
pública,
information
porque
in
también es
other
real
places.
que tenemos tanto bombardeo de
The
todo y todo pasa
press
tan
and
rápido que necesitas
well,
el aquí y
everything is
ahora.
so
De
fast
hecho,
that you need to be here and now in the
las campañas de
present.
marketing cambian con el tiempo.
Marketing campaigns
Antes
change
estábamos
over
muchos
time.
meses promocionando la serie.
Before
Ahora
we would
tirás
spend
alguna pieza para
months
que la gente diga,
promoting
si está
everything,
por la
but
serie
now we
fulleto.
have like
Y
a
en
little
realidad es la
something here,
semana
a little something
anterior o
there,
las 2
but
semanas
then
anteriores, te diría el día
the
anterior y el
2
mismo
weeks in
día
advance, or
que
maybe
se
on the very
bombardea
same
las
day
redes de
that
un
it's going
modo que
to be
digas,
released,
este es el evento
that's
del
when
día.
you
La gente
bomb.
es
I mean,
aquí
you
y
throw the
ahora.
bombs
Todo
like
pasa,
today.
mañana
Everything
ya todo
happens
es
now.
dicho.
Tomorrow,
Entonces,
everything's sold.
por eso las plataformas muchas veces
So
dicen,
that's
no
why
queremos
platforms
informar,
say
porque
we
se
don't want to
pierde entre que
inform
se empieza
because
a
this
producir la
gets
serie, sale al
lost
aire, que pasan
when
6 meses, un año o
when the
más.
production starts, and
Imagínate
then
que la
we
gente
have 6 months or
pierde
a year. People
interés y hasta puede generarse
is not
frustración.
interested anymore,
Porque
and
si yo
perhaps
quiero ver, no
frustration
sé,
appears.
la última película
Because
de
if
Julia
I want
Roberts
to watch, for
y la
instance,
voy a ver en 2
Julia Roberts'
años y cuando me
latest
entero ya
film,
me
and
frustré
I
porque
see it
la
in
quería ver, ya,
2 years,
por ahí no me
well, I'm
interesa.
frustrated because
Entonces,
maybe I'm not
lo
interested
importante es
anymore
tirar
in two
algunos
years.
tips para
So
algún
the
público, pero
important thing would
darle
be
con
to
todos los
give
días
some tips out,
anteriores. Y ahí
but
vas a
then
generar
the
una
the
necesidad, una
days
expectativa en
before,
el público que
that's where you
seguramente va a ir
really
a ver ese
you
estreno.
you
Y a
bombard
partir
them.
de ahí, bueno,
So people will be
lógicamente
really
es la
interested.
conversación, ¿no?
And that's when
El famoso boca
the
en boca de
conversation
otras épocas
gets
ahora se va a
going,
dar en la
word of
conversación
mouth,
diaria y
and you
periódica
have
de
the
lo que está
constant
pasando con esa serie que va a
conversation
hacer
about
que
what's
cada vez más
happening in
público
this
la quiera
series,
ver.
and this will make the audience bigger.
Bueno, nos quedaron algunas preguntas en el tintero, pero
So
nos quedamos sin
some
tiempo. La
questions are
verdad, muchos
unanswered,
agradecimientos
but we
veíamos
are
en el
running
chat.
short
Más de
of time.
650,
Over
tenemos ahora más de 650
650
todavía conectados. Así que,
people have
primero que nada, Pablo,
participated. So
agradecerte
first of all,
muchísimo por haber,
thank you, Pablo,
digamos,
so
hecho tiempo
much
para poder
for
estar aquí con
having made
nosotros.
the time to be
Realmente
here
muy
with us.
importante, creo que
It
estuvo muy
has
bueno y fue
been
muy, muy
great
constructivo.
to have
En ese
you, very
sentido, de vuelta, agradecerte
constructive.
por estar
In
ahí.
this regard, I'd like to thank you one more
Y bueno, y
time for
también
your
obviamente
presence.
a
And
todos
of
los que
course,
nos están viendo de toda
all who are
Latinoamérica,
watching
de
from
todo el
all
Caribe
over
también y
Latin
de toda la
America
región.
and the
Así que,
Caribbean
ante
and
todo,
the
por eso,
region.
Pablo, muchas gracias.
So
Muchas
thank you
gracias
so
a
much,
nos queda de este
Pablo,
lado.
and
Y bueno,
thank
aprovechar
you,
simplemente para
Claudia,
cerrar. Bueno, acá tenemos también a Claudia,
and
Diego también. Muchísimas gracias por
Diego,
su exposición y
Bustos.
por haber
Thank
estado
you
con
so
nosotros.
much for your
Veíamos ahí muchos
presentations, for
agradecimientos de vuelta
being
en los
with
comentarios,
us.
así que de
People are
vuelta,
also very
gracias.
grateful for your input.
Muchas
So
gracias. Buenas
thank
tardes a
you, thank
todos.
you, thank you. Good
Buenas tardes.
afternoon, everyone.
Les recuerdo a todos ahora
Let
sí
me then
que
remind you
el próximo
that
jueves
our next
tendremos el
session,
próximo
next
encuentro
Thursday,
del curso, el
we
próximo
will
módulo
be
sobre
sharing
el
the
sector
next
de
module
videojuegos y
on the
sobre
video
esports.
game
Así que,
sector and
bueno, los esperamos a todos
esports.
el
So
jueves
we look
próximo a las
forward
10
to
de la
this
mañana de
event
Argentina,
next
9 de la mañana
Thursday,
hora Washington
9
DC.
a.m.
Así que, bueno,
Washington,
muchas gracias.
10 a.m. Argentina. Thank you, everyone.